My name is Mary Elizabeth Harper. I am 67 years old and have been a nun for over 4 decades. I live in a quiet convent, surrounded by tall pine trees and a chilly air that seems to whisper ancient prayers in the quiet town of Bloomington, Indiana. St. Agnes Convent has been my home since I was 21. Here, life moves at a different pace, marked by the tolling of the bell, by liturgies, by the sound of the rosary being prayed in unison. I am not one to doubt easily. I have always been steadfast. As a child, when my mother took me to Sunday Mass in Springfield, I felt something strong, a presence, a calling. While my friends dreamed of wedding dresses and trips to New York, I dreamed of the silence of a cloister, of the pages of Scripture, of humble service to God. I became a novice early, and I obeyed every rule with devotion. The vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience never seemed like burdens to me. They were paths, and I walked that path with joy. I spent 46 years believing that I was doing exactly what God wanted me to do. Life in the convent was predictable, and I found solace in that. We woke before the sun, prayed for hours. Meals were simple, words few. The world outside seemed distant. The news, the wars, the scandals, it was all just noise. Inside, there was only faith, but as steadfast as my heart was, there were questions I never dared to ask out loud. Questions that came to me when I looked into the eyes of a novice who was too young, or when I read passages in the Bible that seemed to contradict what we were being taught. But I swallowed these doubts with more prayer. I told myself, this is just temptation. We have to trust. That night, everything seemed the same. It was winter. A bitter wind blew outside, but the chapel was warm, lit only by the candles at the foot of the altar. I prayed alone, as I did every Wednesday. The rosary slipped between my fingers, repeating the litany of the souls in purgatory. I had always had immense compassion for these forgotten souls. I felt it was my mission to alleviate their suffering with my prayers. Then, suddenly, something changed. It was as if the air had been knocked out of my body all at once. A sharp, brutal pain shot through my chest. I tried to hold on to the bench, but my arms gave out. Everything went blurry. The cold floor hit me like a stone, and my vision slowly darkened. The last image I had was of the stained glass window of St. Teresa, but that night, she wasn't smiling. Her eyes, made of colored glass, seemed to be crying. I was found minutes later by one of the younger sisters with no pulse. The paramedics said my heart had stopped for almost 12 minutes. But of course, I only found out later, because what I experienced in that interval was something that no doctrine prepared me to face. And if you are here, perhaps you also carry, even if silently, that same restlessness that once burned inside me. So before we continue, like this video and subscribe to the channel, because this story is not just mine. It can touch someone you never imagined. When I closed my eyes in that chapel, I thought it was just another prayer, another moment of silent surrender. But what happened next was the kind of experience you don't believe until you live it. My body fell to the ground without resistance. It was as if my soul had been ripped from my chest. There was no warning, no foreshadowing, just a second of absolute silence, followed by emptiness. As the sisters ran in panic trying to revive me, I was no longer there. I watched the scene from outside, as if I were hovering above my own body. I saw Sister Kathleen trembling as she held my wrist. I heard the screams for help, even though I had no ears. It was as if everything was happening around me, but I was on another plane. And then came the tunnel. Yes, that tunnel that many describe. A kind of passage made of soft, warm, welcoming light. It wasn't like sunlight, nor like the light from the candles in the chapel. It was a light that seemed to have a consciousness of its own, a presence, and it pulled me. Not with force, but with tenderness, like someone calling a child into their arms. As I got closer, I began to feel a peace I had never experienced in my entire life. It was unlike any mass, retreat, or prayer time. It was as if fear, judgment, doubt, all had been left behind. But at the same time, there was something strange. I felt that light, although welcoming, hid something deeper, something that I needed to see. It was as if, before reaching that place of rest, I needed to understand, to face. And then, in the midst of that infinite light, he appeared. There was no doubt. There was no denying. I saw Jesus, but not like in the paintings in the convent, nor like in the stained glass images I had always admired. He was not the white man with blue eyes we had been taught to imagine. His skin was dark, his eyes deep. There was compassion in them, but also truth, a naked, raw truth, impossible to ignore. He didn't speak with words. He spoke with presence. And yet, I heard with absolute clarity, "You lived by faith, but you did not know the whole truth." That sentence pierced me like a spear. Everything inside me trembled. The security of an entire life dedicated to the church was put at risk in a second. I started to remember all the times I followed orders without question, when I looked away so as not to see the contradictions, when I judged people for not following the same path as me. But why would he be showing me this now? What else was behind that light? Why, after so many years of faithfulness, did my encounter with Jesus begin with a confrontation? And in that moment, before I could even formulate a question, something even more unexpected happened. He reached out his hand, and when it touched mine, everything changed. We weren't walking on a physical path, but it was as if we were moving through something alive. The tunnel of light, once calm, began to pulse like a heart. The colors around us vibrated, not just white or gold. They were colors I couldn't name, as if each one represented a feeling, a memory, a hidden truth. I felt as if each step was stripping me of old layers of beliefs that I carried like a second skin, dogmas, fears, rules that had been repeated so many times that I no longer knew if they came from God or from men. Jesus walked beside me in silence, but his presence spoke louder than 1,000 sermons. It was not a presence that demanded worship. It was a presence that invited understanding. And for the first time, I realized that my knowledge of him was small, very small. Suddenly, the tunnel opened, and before me appeared something indescribable. It was like an infinite valley, where beings of light floated. I couldn't see faces, but I recognized them. They were souls. Each one shone with a different intensity. Some closer, others farther away. And even without words, I knew. They were all being welcomed. No judgment, no fear, just love. I saw a man in a turban being enveloped in a blue light, a woman with Asian features being welcomed with soft music. I saw a boy smiling. He had no religion, but he was pure. And everyone was welcomed. That's when I asked myself, in my mind, but weren't they Christians? And Jesus, without moving his lips, responded with something that sounded like a wave vibrating inside me. They knew me, by heart. I felt my world crumble. What do you mean? All my life, I believed that salvation was for those who accepted Jesus, followed the sacraments, and obeyed the church. That's what we were taught, wasn't it? But there, before me, were souls of all faiths. Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, people who had never read a single page of the Bible. And yet, they were there, being received with the same tenderness, with the same radiance. I started to cry, crying in a way I didn't know was possible. Not out of sadness, but out of liberation, because I finally understood that divine love doesn't fit into any human structure, that God isn't the property of any religion, and that everything we judge here on earth is just a reflection of our limitations, not his. In that moment, I saw myself clearly for the first time, and I realized how often my faith had been shaped more by fear of hell than by love for my neighbor. And as this thought echoed within me, Jesus looked at me with compassion, and he said just one word, "You are ready." But ready for what? I didn't know yet, but something told me. The revelation was just beginning. When he said I was ready, it wasn't a compliment. It was almost a warning, like someone who knows that what comes next won't be easy to hear, but it's necessary. Jesus led me out of that valley of sheltered souls. The scenery around us began to change. The once soft light became denser, like a golden mist. There was no ground, no sky. It was like being inside a living truth, and I felt like he wanted to show me something that would shatter everything I had held sacred. We stopped in front of a kind of mirror made of light, but when I looked, I didn't see my reflection. I saw scenes from my own life. I saw young Mary Elizabeth, 22 years old, kneeling at the altar, making her final vows. I saw my sincere joy. I saw my real devotion. But then, other images began to appear, images that I would like to forget. I saw it when I looked down on a pregnant young woman who asked for help from the parish. I remembered how I considered her a sinner. I saw the moment I refused to welcome a trans woman who sought comfort, and how I felt spiritually superior because of it. I saw how many times I silently judged those who thought differently, who loved differently, who didn't fit into the rules I followed. My heart ached. I cried like a child. But I did everything right. I just wanted to obey. I tried to justify. Jesus looked at me with an expression I will never forget. There was no anger. There was no condemnation. Just a deep pain, like seeing someone you love hurt while trying to please them. You wanted to follow me, but you did not know me completely. Those words echoed within me with the weight of centuries. I understood that my faith had been based more on ritual than compassion, that I had followed rules, but missed encounters, that I had lived for holiness, but forgotten humanity. Then he showed me another scene, not from my life, but from the history of the church. I saw ancient councils, religious leaders debating not about faith but about power. I saw dogmas being decided by political influence, scriptures being cut, truths being molded to maintain structures of control. Not everything that was taught in my name came from me, he said. It was like a knife to my soul. It was hard to accept, but deep down, I knew. I always knew. There was always a nagging feeling inside me that I called doubt, when in fact, it was spirit whispering a greater truth. I took a deep breath, or tried to. There was no air there, but there was a need to breathe, like someone trying to absorb the impossible. Jesus came closer. He touched my face, and in that touch, I felt everything: forgiveness, pain, compassion, and mission. Because there, before him, I understood. That was not the end. It was the beginning. And something told me I would not stay there for long. He took me deeper. There was no time, no space. It was as if we were passing through invisible layers of reality, each revealing a part of what I had never dared to imagine. This was not just my story or the salvation of souls. It was something bigger, something that involved all of humanity. Jesus showed me the birth of the church as we know it today. I am not talking about the living community of the first Christians, but the structure, the institution. I saw emperors using faith as an instrument of control. I saw leaders making decisions in councils that seemed more like political tribunals than spiritual gatherings. I watched as whole sections of scripture were set aside, erased. Writings of women, accounts of non-Roman peoples, words of compassion that empowered the individual but weakened the hierarchy. The truth has been simplified. To be domesticated, he told me. And that phrase echoes in me to this day. All my life, I was taught that questioning was a lack of faith, that obedience was the safest path, and I obeyed, believing I was serving God. But there, before him, I realized that true faith does not fear questions, that love does not require blindness. I saw how many men and women throughout history were silenced, persecuted, burned, not for denying Jesus, but for daring to say that his love was greater than the walls of the church, and I cried for each one of them. It was at that moment that I felt a weight lift from within me, as if I was being freed, not from faith, but from fear. And perhaps you, who are listening to this now, have felt something similar. Perhaps at some point in your life, you too have felt suffocated by truths that seemed more like prisons than paths. If this touched you in any way, write in the comments. Share what you felt. I am not sharing this experience to convince anyone, but so that hearts that have always been suspicious of what was imposed know that they are not alone. In that place of light, I learned that God is not offended by sincere questions. He comes closer. And that's what he was doing to me in that moment, bringing me closer to a greater truth, not to destroy me, but to rebuild me. After pointing out the human distortions in the history of faith, Jesus led me down a different path. It was as if the light around us opened up into a new horizon. But this one was not golden or bright. It was deep, silent, almost gray. And I soon realized this was a place where the forgotten lived. Not the damned, as I was taught to imagine, but the ignored. Those who were never remembered in sermons, who were never mentioned at the altars. Simple people, real people. I saw faces I had never met. I saw an elderly woman with wrinkled skin and calloused hands. She had never set foot in a church, but every day she shared what little she had with her neighbors. I saw a man who spent his life caring for his sick wife, never complaining, even though he was called faithless for never kneeling before a cross. And then I saw children from cultures that had never heard the name Jesus, but whose hearts vibrated with love, innocence, and compassion. Children who had died young, victims of war, hunger, and abandonment. They were there, and they shone. I cried. I cried because I realized how often I looked at the world in a narrow way. I thought I knew God's ways, but in reality, I only knew the fences that had been placed around him. "These are mine," Jesus told me. Those words sounded like a sweet thunder, an unshakable certainty. There was no anger, no revenge, just a calm affirmation. His love reaches where no dogma has ever reached. I felt ashamed for having believed, for so long, that heaven was a room locked with a password that only a privileged few received, as long as they repeated the right codes, in the right way, with the right clothes, in the right place. But there, before him, I realized that heaven is a state of the heart. And as I took all this in, I noticed something even more disturbing. Some of those forgotten souls shone brighter than many who, theoretically, accomplished everything. There was something about them, a lightness, a glow that did not come from words or rites, but from the way they lived, from the purity of their intentions, from the silent love they spread throughout the world without ever being noticed. And then, like a soft whisper, Jesus finished, "Not every faithful person recognizes me, but every sincere heart finds me." I kept quiet, because at that moment, there were no more questions, only the truth, and it was before me, clear as ever. That phrase, "every sincere heart finds me," kept resonating inside me like an echo that passes through ancient walls. And instead of bringing me immediate peace, it awakened in me something that until then I had avoided: guilt. I began to remember, not grand events but small, everyday moments in which I chose to close my heart. I vividly remembered the day a young woman entered our chapel, wearing a short skirt and heavy makeup, visibly shaken. Instead of welcoming her, I was harsh. "This is a sacred place, my child," I said, my voice thick with judgment. I saw a novice confess to me her doubts about dogma. Instead of listening to her with love, I told her to pray more and talk less. I saw sisters who suggested helping marginalized communities silenced me, as if loving the world too much was a sign of spiritual weakness. With each memory, a weight grew inside me. The light around me seemed to dim, not as a punishment, but as a reflection of what I was feeling. Jesus was there, motionless, looking at me with eyes that did not judge, but that saw everything. "You thought you were defending me, but you were hiding me." Those words tore me apart. I never imagined that my blind allegiance might have alienated people from him. It never occurred to me that by obeying the structure, I might have betrayed the spirit. I was so busy preserving the temple that I forgot to care for the people who came to the door. I fell to my knees, if that gesture made sense in that place, and wept as I had never wept in my life. It wasn't just sadness, it was deep regret, because I had dedicated my life to something that, although well-intentioned, was far from the true heart of Jesus. And yet, he didn't walk away from me. He came closer, he touched my head, and in that touch I felt something I didn't deserve, Forgiveness. You acted as you were taught, but now I teach you with my love. I felt each word as if they were engraved on me with fire and tenderness at the same time, and I realized that true repentance is not the kind that destroys us, but the kind that transforms us. I was no longer the same nun. The armor I had built up over years of rigidity was crumbling, and for the first time I felt freedom within my faith. Not the freedom to do whatever I wanted, but to finally be who God truly called me to be: whole, honest, humble. The guilt that had previously paralyzed me now moved me. I knew something was brewing, and this journey was not over yet. I believed that death was an endpoint, but there, before him, I understood that sometimes death is a comma, a pause to see oneself from the outside, to see what earthly eyes cannot capture. After everything he showed me, the forgotten, the distortions, the guilt, and the forgiveness, I felt as if I had been reborn. It was then that Jesus led me to a place that seemed to be made of silence. There were no shapes, no colors. It was like being enveloped in pure consciousness. And there, he spoke, not with words, but with truth. Now you can stay, or you can go back. That paralyzed me. Staying meant peace. It meant rest, the end of pain, of doubt, of responsibility. It meant being in the presence of love in its purest form. The human heart cannot even imagine what that state is like, because there, nothing is missing. But go back? Returning meant returning to the fragile body, to the life I had left lying on the cold floor of the chapel. Returning meant carrying the weight of what I had seen, knowing that the world might not be ready. It meant facing skepticism, judgment, even from those who had always walked with me. The church itself might reject me. They won't believe it, I said, frightened. Jesus did not deny. The truth hurts those who live trapped in fear, but there are hearts waiting for it, and you will be the bridge. That broke me. I thought of all the people who live in silence, feeling that there is something wrong with what they have been taught, but who do not have the courage to question it. People who have been hurt by religious leaders, driven away from their faith by guilt, fear, exclusion. I thought of the souls who sincerely seek God, but feel condemned for not fitting in with the rules. And then I understood. This choice was not mine alone. It was for them. I took a deep breath, or tried to, and even without knowing how, I just agreed in thought. Try. At that moment, everything fell apart. The light withdrew, consciousness contracted. I felt as if I were being sucked into a silent whirlpool. The love was still there, but now as a distant trail. And then something heavy pulled me, back into my body. Pain, cold, voices, metallic sounds, an insistent beep. And then, the impossible. I opened my eyes. Sister Kathleen's face was covered in tears. A doctor was shouting that it was a miracle. And I just whispered, my voice breaking, I saw Jesus. But no one there imagined what he had shown me, and that my mission was just beginning. The air filled my lungs again like a gust of wind invading a house that had been locked for years. My eyes were barely open, but I felt everything. The weight of his body, the strong smell of disinfectant, the incessant noise of the machines. He was in the hospital in Bloomington, the chapel, the light, the touch of Jesus. It all seemed distant, but it was real as the pain that now throbbed again in my chest. The doctors looked at me as if they were seeing a ghost. She shouldn't have come back, I heard one of them mutter. They had registered my death. Cardiac arrest for over 20 minutes. No apparent brain activity. The team was just beginning to consider the final death protocol when, without explanation, my heart started beating again. And I woke up, saying, I saw Jesus. In the days that followed, I was kept under observation. There appeared to be no after effects, no brain damage, no visible damage. But something invisible had changed, and profoundly. I was no longer the same woman who had fallen in that chapel. And the more days passed, the more I felt the urgency to share what I had experienced. But how? The nuns from the convent came to visit me. Most of them had tears in their eyes, relief on their faces. But when I mentioned, cautiously, that I had had an experience, that I had been received by Jesus and heard truths that went beyond what we had been taught. Their expressions changed. First, silence. Then the Sister Superior, a woman I have always admired, placed her hand on my bed and said softly, "Sister Mary, some experiences are personal. Not everything needs to be shared. That can be confusing for younger people, you know?" I understand very well. At that moment, I realized that the resistance was not coming from bad faith. It came from fear. The fear of destabilizing a structure that, for many, was the only safe thing in this world. But I could not keep quiet about what had been shown to me. It would be betraying everything that Jesus had entrusted to me. The next morning, I asked for a notebook and began to write. I wrote everything, every detail, every revelation, every face I saw in that valley, every word of his. I wrote with trembling hands, like someone in a hurry, like someone carrying an urgency greater than their own body. And as I wrote, I felt something inside me grow stronger. It wasn't courage. It was a mission. I knew that many would not believe it, that they would say it was a hallucination, the effect of lack of oxygen, the imagination of an old nun on the verge of death. But I also knew that there were people out there with ready hearts, hearts that, like mine, were thirsty not for more rules, but for truth. And it was for these hearts that I decided I would speak, even if it was in secret, even if it was by other means. Because what I saw was not meant to be kept, it was meant to be lived and shared. I returned to the convent with a weakened body, but with my soul on fire. I no longer fit into the routine I had before. The repeated prayers sounded mechanical. The liturgical chants echoed like memories of a faith that I respected, but that no longer explained everything I knew now. With every step I took down the cold stone corridors, I could feel the tension in the air. The sisters looked at me with tenderness, but also with an uncomfortable caution, like trying not to provoke someone who carries an invisible wound. No one asked what I had seen. No one wanted to know. It was as if, by avoiding the subject, they could keep it trapped in a corner of reality where nothing would change. But I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I looked for the priest responsible for the spiritual direction of the convent. A learned man, soft-spoken, with tired eyes and speeches always anchored in tradition. I went into his room, sat in front of him, and told him everything, every detail, every scene, every word of Jesus. For a moment he was completely silent, his fingers interlaced on the table. Then he took a deep breath and said to me, "Sister Mary, there are experiences that belong to the personal sphere. The Church, in her wisdom, guides us not to give public voice to visions that could cause scandal among the faithful. But what if the truth sets you free?" I asked, almost whispering. He looked away. There was compassion there, but also fear. Fear that it would all come crashing down. Fear that the structure, built with centuries of care and power, would be wounded by a report from the heart of a nun. "The structure is strong, but the faith of many is fragile," he replied. I left that room in silence, but inside, I was screaming. Why silence what Jesus showed me? Why turn a living truth into something dangerous? Why protect the walls when there were souls outside crying out for a break? That night, I returned to the chapel. I sat on the same bench where my heart had stopped weeks before. The stained glass window of St. Teresa was still there, and this time, it seemed to be smiling. I closed my eyes and said in my mind, "Lord, if I cannot speak here, show me another way." And he answered, not with words, but with a clear idea, which appeared like a flame lit in the darkness. "Speak where you are heard, reach whoever listens." That was it. If the Church couldn't hear me, the world could. And I was willing to go to him, even in secret, even alone. Because truth, when it is born in the heart, no longer belongs only to those who have experienced it. It belongs to those who need it. For weeks, I lived in enforced silence. I participated in the liturgies, the communal meals, the tasks of the convent, but my heart was elsewhere. What I had seen, heard, and felt pulsed within me like a living, restless truth. It was like carrying a flame hidden under my habit, burning in secret, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It was on a cold afternoon, while organizing old books in the small library of the convent, that I found a forgotten copy of Saint Hildegard. She too had had visions. She too had been misunderstood. But she had written, even under censorship. I felt at that moment that I was not the first, and that I would not be the last. I then decided to act. I wrote down every detail of my experience. I rewrote and revised it during the early morning hours when the silence of the convent was denser than the sin itself. I did not sign my real name. I used only a pseudonym, Sister of Light. I sent the full text to a spiritual YouTube channel that I knew was discreet, but widely followed by people seeking meaning beyond the walls of formal religion. I didn't ask for feedback. I just sent it. 2 weeks later, the video was up. I didn't expect it to gain visibility. I thought that maybe a few dozen people would watch it, reflect on it, and that's it. But no, something surprising happened. Thousands of people began to comment, share, and send messages. Many said they felt the presence of God just by hearing the words. Others shared their own experiences, visions, encounters, dreams, that they had kept to themselves for fear of being called crazy or heretical. I cried listening to this nun. Finally, someone says what I've always felt deep down in my soul. I started believing in God again because of this video. These phrases came to me as silent confirmations. I was not alone. And, more importantly, the message was getting through to where it needed to. No one in the convent suspected anything. But the video reached souls all over the country. Men and women who carried imposed guilt, stifled doubts, fears fed by rigid speeches, were now finding relief. Relief through the truth. I didn't need to be seen. I didn't need applause. I just wanted people to know that God's love is not a stream. It is an ocean. In the solitude of my room, with the computer closed, I knelt down and prayed. Not the ready-made prayers from the breviary, but simple words, spoken with tears. Lord, may every person touched by this message remember what you told me. The truth does not belong to the church. It belongs to the sincere heart. And there, in silence, I knew. My mission was being accomplished. But there was one last step left. Something still awaited me. One last revelation that would change everything. The following weeks were silent, but charged with a new presence. It was as if, ever since that encounter with Jesus, a part of him had remained with me. Not in vision, not in voice, but in consciousness. A kind of communion that transcends rites. I no longer needed to hear to know. I felt. It was on an ordinary morning, while the wind blew through the windows of the convent, that it happened. I dreamed that I was walking through a vast open field under a starless sky. Everything was dark, but I felt no fear. I walked barefoot, listening to my footsteps on the dry earth. Until, in the distance, I saw a burning fire, and next to it, him, Jesus. I sat down next to him, and he just looked at me, as if he had already said everything but was saving one last word. You saw it. You felt it. Now, understand. Then he reached out and showed me something that was not a picture, not a memory. It was a feeling that was turning into words inside me. Truth does not belong to any institution, not to a temple, not to a book. Truth belongs to those who seek it with humility. Heaven is not a prize. It is a reflection of the heart. I cried, but not like before. This time I cried with relief. It all made sense. I understood that I was not sent back to fight the church, nor to overthrow doctrines, but to remind myself, you, everyone, that God never belonged to rules, structures, or castes. He belongs to gestures, to looks, to forgiveness, to silent compassion, to sincere listening, to unconditional love. I woke up with a deep peace, and since then I have never been the same. Today I remain in the convent. I do my chores. I pray with the sisters. But inside me, something has changed forever. I speak less, but I listen more. I do not preach, but I welcome. And when I meet someone who is lost, I do not offer rules. I offer presence. And if they ask me, I tell them. Not my story, But the message: God does not reveal himself to those who memorize words, but to those who live love. And if you got here, it wasn't by chance. Maybe this story was the answer his heart had been searching for a long time. Perhaps you, like me, are rediscovering what is truly sacred. And if so, then may that truth find a home within you. Because in the end, after life, death, and doubt, what remains is only love. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving messages that awaken, heal, and transform. Here, you will find more than just stories. You will find truths that you may never have been told, but that your heart has always felt. If you reach the end, comment below. Heaven begins in the heart. That way I'll know you went all the way with me, and that this message found a home within you. Leave your like. He helps this story reach other souls who also need to hear it. And now, watch the next video that is appearing here on the screen. It brings yet another real, intense, and exciting revelation that can change everything you believe. We'll meet there.